The air in the restoration studio hung thick with the scent of aged linseed oil and delicate solvents, a unique perfume of history being carefully unveiled. Sunlight, filtered through tall north-facing windows, illuminated dust motes dancing in slow motion, landing gently on the ancient canvases that lined the walls. This was a sanctuary of quiet reverence, where time seemed to slow, allowing skilled hands to peel back centuries, layer by painstaking layer. On a sturdy easel, bathed in the soft glow, rested a magnificent 17th-century portrait, its subject a stern-faced nobleman, emerging from beneath a shroud of grime and discolored varnish that had clung to him for generations. The final stages of its cleaning were underway, a process akin to waking a sleeper from a very long dream. Lead restorer Ilara Vance, a woman whose years had etched wisdom around her keen eyes, worked with a surgeon's precision. Her reputation was built on an unwavering commitment to authenticity, a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, ensuring every stroke revealed the artist's original intent. Not merely a superficial shine, she held a tiny cotton swab, damp with a specially formulated solution. Her breath held, her gaze fixed on the sitter's right hand, which rested elegantly on a velvet-draped table in the painting. It was a hand that had always appeared empty, a mere artistic flourish of posture. Yet something was different now. A subtle, almost imperceptible texture, a faint outline, had begun to assert itself from beneath the last stubborn vestiges of the old, yellowed varnish. It was a ghost of a detail, previously swallowed by the passage of time and the accumulated dirt of 300 years. Ilara paused, her hand hovering, her brow furrowed in a concentration so intense it seemed to draw all sound from the room. She leaned closer, her magnifying visor dropping into place, bringing the painted surface into startling clarity. What she saw sent a shiver of professional excitement, tinged with a deeper, more profound sense of discovery, through her. Subtly clutched between the sitter's index finger and thumb, nestled almost imperceptibly against the dark fabric of his sleeve, was a small, intricately carved object. It was no trick of light, no artistic embellishment, but a deliberate, finely rendered detail. Its tiny surface gleamed faintly, hinting at polished metal or perhaps even a precious stone. It appeared to be a miniature, perhaps a locket, or a delicate, ornate key, painted with such astonishing skill that its very existence had been an optical illusion, blending seamlessly into the background for centuries, waiting for the exact right moment and the exact right pair of eyes to be rediscovered. This object, undeniably real within the pigment and canvas, had never once been documented in any historical records, mentioned in any inventory, or even vaguely alluded to in the extensive correspondence surrounding the portrait's creation and ownership. It was an enigma, a silent whisper from the past, now made visible. The painting's current owner, Lord Alistair Finch, a direct descendant of the stern-faced nobleman, was informed immediately. His family had held the portrait for generations, a symbol of their enduring legacy and impeccable lineage. I recall the sharpness in his voice when Ilara called, a dismissive annoyance that cut through the usual pleasantries. A strange object? Really, Ilara, are we certain it's not simply a shadow or a crack in the old paint? His tone, even through the phone, conveyed a distinct lack of interest, a thinly veiled impatience. He urged her to continue without delay, his primary concern clearly the completion of the restoration, not the potential implications of a nascent discovery. He suggested it was merely a trick of light, a figment of an overactive imagination, or at best an artistic embellishment, a minor detail not worthy of further scrutiny. For him, the painting was a static representation of a glorious past, an heirloom whose narrative was already firmly written, not a living document capable of revealing new, inconvenient truths. I, observing this interaction from my own vantage point, or perhaps recounting it as a historian deeply familiar with the Finch family's curated narrative, maintained a strategic calm. I understood, with a certainty that Alistair Finch clearly lacked, the potential magnitude of this discovery despite his immediate, almost visceral denial. My mind, already a repository of the family's convoluted history, began to piece together fragments, whispers, and long-silenced rumors. The way this small, overlooked object seemed to perfectly fit a historical gap, a missing piece in a puzzle that had always felt incomplete. Its sudden, undeniable presence fundamentally altered the established interpretation of the sitter's identity, perhaps even his legacy, hinting at a hidden life, a secret allegiance, or a concealed truth that had been carefully buried beneath layers of societal expectation and familial pride. The full, devastating impact of this tiny, re-emerged detail remained hidden, a storm brewing on the horizon, but the initial ripple of its significance was already undeniable. It felt like the universe itself was conspiring, patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal what had been so carefully concealed. Some secrets refused to stay buried, no matter how deep the varnish. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The faint outline of the object in the sitter's hand, a ghost of truth emerging from centuries of obscuration, had sent an undeniable shiver through the meticulously calm restoration studio. It was a tremor that resonated not just with the present, but with the distant echoes of the past, beckoning us back to a world vastly different yet intrinsically connected to our own. To truly grasp the gravity of this discovery, to understand why a tiny, forgotten detail could unravel generations of carefully constructed legacy, we must first immerse ourselves in the cultural canvas from which this portrait sprung. We must journey back to the heart of 17th-century Europe, a continent in flux, yet rigidly bound by tradition and hierarchy. Imagine a land sculpted by rolling hills and ancient forests, where grand estates punctuated the landscape, their formidable walls holding centuries of secrets. This was a time when the scent of wood smoke mingled with the perfume of privilege, and the clatter of horse-drawn carriages echoed through cobbled streets. The specific region, a prosperous hub nestled between vital trade routes, was a melting pot of ambition and artistry. Merchants grew wealthy on exotic goods, while the aristocracy, with their ancestral lands and titles, commanded respect and influence. Life for the common folk was one of arduous labor and simple pleasures, but for the elite, it was a finely choreographed dance of social expectation, political maneuvering, and ostentatious display. In this intricate social tapestry, portraiture was far more than mere decoration. It was a potent declaration of status, power, and enduring legacy. A commissioned portrait, often a lengthy and expensive endeavor, served as a visual testament to one's place in the world, a carefully curated image meant to be passed down through generations. Every brushstroke, every symbol, every fold of fabric held meaning, communicating wealth, virtue, lineage, and piety. It was a public performance captured in oil, an immutable record of an individual's desired perception. To include an object, particularly one so subtly rendered yet clearly intentional, was to embed a message, a silent whisper across time, meant for those discerning enough to hear. It was within this historical context that the family into which our sitter was born, the illustrious Valois-Beaumont, carved their formidable niche. For centuries, their name had been synonymous with power and prestige in the region. Their ancestral home, Château de la Couronne, stood as a physical embodiment of their enduring influence, its sprawling gardens and opulent halls a testament to their accumulated wealth and impeccable taste. They were patrons of the arts, benefactors of the church, and shrewd political players, their social circle comprising the most influential figures of their era. Their reputation, meticulously cultivated over generations, was their most prized possession, a gleaming edifice built on a foundation of carefully selected truths and conveniently forgotten pasts. Their current descendants, particularly Eleanor Vance, the painting's present owner, embodied this ancestral pride with an almost unshakable conviction. Eleanor, a woman whose every gesture exuded an inherited sense of entitlement, viewed the Valois-Beaumont legacy not as a historical narrative to be explored, but as a sacred text, immutable and beyond reproach. The painting itself to her was a magnificent heirloom, a status symbol that underscored her own esteemed position within society rather than a nuanced historical document capable of revealing inconvenient truths. Her initial dismissive reaction to the restorer's discovery, her insistence that it was a trick of the light, was not born of ignorance, but of a deep-seated desire to preserve the pristine, glorified version of her family's past. My own connection to this history, however, was far more complex, forged over years of dedicated research and an almost obsessive fascination with the Valois-Beaumont archives. As a historian specializing in the social dynamics of 17th-century European aristocracy, I had spent countless hours poring over their meticulously kept ledgers, their correspondence, their wills, always searching for the human story beneath the polished surface. I felt an almost ethical duty to historical truth, a quiet commitment that often placed me at odds with those who preferred the comfortable narrative of myth. I saw the painting not just as a beautiful work of art, but as a silent witness, a portal to a bygone era, and now, potentially, a key to unlocking a long-buried secret. The initial tensions with Eleanor were subtle, almost imperceptible to an outsider, yet palpable to me. She had always viewed my historical inquiries with a polite but firm skepticism, an underlying current of suspicion that I might unearth something that tarnished the gleaming Valois-Beaumont name. Her preference for grand, sweeping narratives of heroism and virtue left little room for the messy, often contradictory realities of human experience. The painting, in her eyes, was a fixed point, an anchor in a glorious past. The notion that it might contain a hidden message, a deliberate alteration of that cherished narrative, was not merely an inconvenience, it was an affront, a challenge to the very foundation of her identity and the legacy she so fiercely guarded. This small, uncatalogued object, now visible for the first time in centuries, was not just a historical anomaly. It was a silent bomb, ticking gently beneath the surface of a meticulously crafted illusion. Its presence promised to shake the very foundations of what Eleanor believed to be true, and what she desperately needed the world to believe. The de Montaigne family, whose lineage stretched back to the very foundations of the country's gentry, had meticulously crafted and polished their narrative over centuries, presenting it as an unblemished tapestry of loyalty, virtue, and unwavering contribution to the realm. Their name was synonymous with stability, their ancestral home a monument to their impeccable standing. This official history, recited at every family gathering, enshrined Lady Althea, the subject of the newly restored portrait, as the ultimate embodiment of these ideals. A pious wife, a devoted mother, a woman whose every action was guided by unimpeachable moral rectitude. Yet beneath this gilded surface, a subterranean current of discord had always flowed, a quiet but persistent erosion of truth that began long before the restorer's delicate brush revealed the hidden object in Althea's hand. The cracks in this carefully constructed edifice were ancient, tracing back to events whispered about only in the darkest corners of the estate, or referenced obliquely in forgotten correspondence. There was the matter of the family's sudden acquisition of vast tracts of land during a period of political upheaval, a transaction always presented as a shrewd, legitimate investment, yet which, upon closer inspection of obscure land deeds, hinted at coercion and questionable alliances. Then there were the habits of selective memory, passed down through generations like an heirloom, where inconvenient truths were simply omitted from the oral tradition, and any documents challenging the official line were mysteriously misplaced or damaged beyond repair. I had spent years immersed in these forgotten archives, driven by an almost obsessive need to understand the true texture of my family's past. My own lineage, though connected, stood somewhat apart from the direct line of Lady Eleanor, the current torchbearer of the family's glorified narrative. This distance afforded me a peculiar vantage point, allowing me to see the subtle distortions, the strategic silences, and the deliberate omissions that had become the bedrock of the de Montaigne identity. I recalled a particular incident from my youth, a hushed conversation I overheard between my great-aunt and a visiting historian, where the historian innocently inquired about a rumored second marriage for one of Althea's contemporaries. My great-aunt, usually so garrulous, had simply gone pale, changed the subject with a forced smile, and later warned me never to pry into old stories that do not concern us. These small, telling episodes were legion. There was the time a distant cousin, an amateur genealogist, discovered a discrepancy in a birth record that suggested a child born out of wedlock had been quietly absorbed into a legitimate branch of the family tree generations ago. His findings were met not with interest but with a chilling wall of silence, followed by subtle but effective social ostracism. His research notes mysteriously vanished, and he soon abandoned his efforts, retreating into a quiet bitterness. Another instance involved a collection of letters from the early 18th century that alluded to Althea's deep friendship with a known radical intellectual, a fact that starkly contradicted her image as a staunch traditionalist. These letters, once housed in the family library, were suddenly donated to a private collector with strict non-disclosure agreements, effectively burying their content from public scrutiny. The emotional aggressions were often subtle, yet deeply effective. Any questioning of the established narrative, no matter how gentle or academically motivated, was met with a dismissive wave of the hand, a patronizing smile, or a curt reminder that some things are best left undisturbed for the sake of family harmony. These were not overt threats, but rather a sophisticated form of psychological control, designed to make anyone who sought alternative truths feel like an unwelcome interloper, a disruptive force threatening the sanctity of the family's legacy. It was a subtle, insidious campaign of truth suppression, a quiet war waged against historical accuracy, meticulously orchestrated to protect an image that was, in essence, a lie. Lady Eleanor, even before the restorer's astonishing discovery, had proven herself a master of this intricate dance of historical manipulation. Her devotion to the family's official narrative bordered on zealotry. She meticulously curated what was displayed in the ancestral home, what stories were told to visitors, and what information was shared with historians. Her pronouncements on family history were absolute, delivered with an air of unassailable authority that brooked no dissent. She controlled access to the family archives with an iron fist, granting entry only to those she deemed trustworthy, which invariably meant those who would reinforce her preferred version of events. Her commitment to this fabricated past was not merely pride, it was a deeply ingrained conviction, almost a religion, upon which her entire identity and the family's perceived prestige rested. The object in Althea's hand was not just a historical anomaly. It was a direct challenge to the very foundation of Eleanor's world, a truth she would fight to extinguish with every fiber of her being. The discovery, though officially dismissed by Lady Eleanor as an insignificant detail, had irrevocably altered the atmosphere within the family. The initial polite disagreements about its potential meaning quickly morphed into sharp, pointed arguments. At first, these debates were confined to hushed tones in the library or during strained dinners, but soon they spilled over into public spaces, fueled by growing media interest and the insidious whisperings of gossip. It wasn't just the narrator and Lady Eleanor at odds. Other family members, previously content to passively accept the established narrative, began to express their own opinions, often colored by personal grievances or long-held suspicions. Some sided with Eleanor, clinging to the familiar comfort of the family myth, while others, emboldened by the discovery, voiced their doubts and called for a more thorough investigation. Even art experts and historians, initially hesitant to challenge Eleanor's authority, began to weigh in, their professional curiosity piqued by the mystery surrounding the object. The local community, once united in their admiration for the venerable family, became fractured along similar lines. Neighbors who had shared generations of friendship now exchanged cautious glances and whispered judgments. Invitations to social gatherings became less frequent, and the once harmonious atmosphere of the village was replaced by an unsettling undercurrent of speculation and suspicion. The psychological environment within the family, and indeed within the entire community, became heavy and suffocating as the weight of the hidden truth pressed down on everyone. Lady Eleanor, feeling her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, reacted with increasing desperation. Her initial dismissals gave way to thinly veiled threats. She attempted to discredit the restorer, questioning their credentials and motives, even implying that they had deliberately planted the object to create a scandal. She threatened legal action against anyone who dared to challenge her version of history, citing ancient family trusts and obscure legal precedents in an attempt to silence dissent. One particularly egregious act involved her attempt to seize the painting itself. Under the guise of ensuring its safety, she arranged for the portrait to be moved to a private vault, effectively cutting off access to anyone who might want to examine it further. This heavy-handed tactic backfired spectacularly, generating even more media attention and fueling accusations of a cover-up. The public, sensing that something was being deliberately hidden, grew increasingly sympathetic to the narrator's cause, viewing them as a lone voice of truth standing against a powerful and ruthless adversary. The narrator's patience, already stretched thin by years of subtle manipulation and historical distortions, finally reached its breaking point. The constant pressure, the veiled threats, and the blatant attempts to suppress the truth had taken their toll. A deep sense of moral outrage began to simmer within them, fueled by a growing conviction that the truth, no matter how painful, must be brought to light. It became undeniably clear to the viewer that a monumental revelation was imminent. The narrative was hurtling towards a decisive moment, a confrontation that would irrevocably alter the course of the family's history and expose the long-buried secrets that lay hidden beneath layers of varnish and carefully constructed lies. The strange object in Althea's hand, once a mere curiosity, had become a catalyst for a reckoning, a symbol of the hidden truths that refused to remain buried any longer. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable sense that the dam was about to break, unleashing a torrent of revelations that would forever change the way the family and the world viewed their past. It was a moment of impending rupture, a point of no return, where the carefully woven tapestry of lies was about to be torn apart, revealing the raw and uncomfortable truth that lay beneath. The stage was set for a final, devastating confrontation, a battle for the soul of the family and the integrity of history itself. The air in the restoration studio, usually so hushed and reverent, crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Weeks had passed since the initial discovery of the strange object in Althea's hand, weeks during which Lady Eleanor's dismissive annoyance had curdled into a palpable menace. Yet the restorer, a woman named Clara, whose quiet demeanor belied an iron will, had refused to be swayed. She had meticulously, painstakingly continued her work, her focus unyielding, even as Eleanor's veiled threats and increasingly aggressive demands for the painting's immediate return grew louder. It was during one particularly late night, the city outside a blur of distant lights, that Clara made the breakthrough. The object, which initially appeared to be a miniature, intricately carved wooden locket, possessed an almost imperceptible seam along its edge. Under powerful magnification, and with the delicate touch of a surgeon, Clara had managed to open it. Inside, nestled within a velvet-lined cavity, no larger than a thumbnail, was not a miniature portrait or a lock of hair, but a tightly folded piece of vellum, so thin it was almost translucent. Its age was evident in its brittle texture, its edges a faint yellow. With trembling hands, Clara carefully unfolded the minuscule document. The script, though faded, was clear and elegant, a formal hand from centuries past. It was a marriage certificate dated 2 years prior to Althea's officially recorded wedding to Lord Ashworth, the man historically recognized as her only husband and the patriarch of the family line. And the groom listed on this clandestine document was not Lord Ashworth, but a man named Thomas Thorne, a scholar and distant, less affluent relative whose name had been all but erased from the family's annals. But the revelations did not stop there. Tucked within the same minuscule fold was a second, even smaller fragment of vellum. This one was a birth record, detailing the arrival of a son, Arthur Thorne, born a year after the secret marriage, and crucially, 3 months before Althea's official grand wedding to Lord Ashworth. The implications were immediate, shattering and utterly devastating to the established narrative. Arthur Thorne, Althea's firstborn, was the true first legitimate heir, not the son she bore with Lord Ashworth. This meant that the entire lineage, the very foundation of the family's claim to its ancestral lands, its titles, and its vast wealth, rested on a lie. Lady Eleanor, and indeed every generation that followed Althea's official line, was, in essence, an illegitimate claimant to a stolen inheritance. The strange object in Althea's hand was not merely a sentimental keepsake, it was a defiant, final testament, a silent scream across centuries, designed to one day expose the profound injustice and reclaim the true legacy. Clara knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this discovery could not be kept silent. The truth, once unleashed, would tear through the fabric of the family's history with the force of a tidal wave. She immediately contacted the narrator, her voice a low, urgent whisper on the phone, the gravity of her words resonating with a deep, almost spiritual weight. The narrator, having suspected for so long that the family's polished history held dark secrets, felt a surge of both vindication and dread. This was the moment, the turning point. There was no going back. Lady Eleanor, however, possessed an uncanny sixth sense for impending disaster. Perhaps it was the sudden, uncharacteristic silence from Clara, or the subtle shift in the narrator's demeanor during a tense phone call, but she sensed the walls closing in. She arrived at the studio unannounced, her face a mask of furious determination, her eyes burning with an almost manic intensity. She demanded to see the painting, her voice sharp and commanding, echoing through the usually tranquil space. Clara, anticipating this confrontation, had already taken precautions. The locket and its contents were safely secured, but the painting, now partially restored, clearly showed the object in Althea's hand, no longer a faint outline, but a distinct, undeniable presence. Eleanor approached the canvas, her gaze fixed on the sitter's hand. Her breath hitched, a guttural sound of pure rage escaping her lips. The object, now so clearly defined, seemed to mock her, to whisper the truth she had fought so desperately to suppress. She lunged forward, her hand outstretched, not to examine, but to tear, to obliterate, to erase the offending evidence from the canvas. Clara, moving with surprising speed, intercepted her, grabbing Eleanor's wrist with a strength born of ethical conviction. A struggle ensued, a silent, desperate dance between preservation and destruction. Eleanor, fueled by generations of inherited lies and the terrifying prospect of her world crumbling, fought with a savage ferocity. She railed against Clara, calling her a meddler, a destroyer of legacies, a common thief trying to defile a sacred family treasure. The narrator, having arrived moments earlier, drawn by an ominous premonition, burst into the studio to witness the chaotic scene. The painting, still on its easel, swayed precariously. Eleanor, momentarily breaking free from Clara's grasp, seized a nearby palette knife, its sharp edge glinting under the studio lights. Her intention was clear: to slash the painting, to destroy the evidence, to silence Althea's centuries-old protest forever. It was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation, a final, violent attempt to cling to a fabricated past. But the narrator was prepared. Knowing Eleanor's capacity for ruthlessness, a contingency plan had been put into motion. As Eleanor raised the knife, a team of art historians, a lawyer, and even a journalist, alerted by the narrator, poured into the studio, witnessing the dramatic tableau. The flash of cameras momentarily stunned Eleanor, freezing her in mid-action, the glinting knife poised above the canvas. The narrator stepped forward, a small, secure box held firmly in their hands. "Lady Eleanor?" The narrator's voice was steady, clear, cutting through the sudden silence. "The truth is already out." With a deliberate movement, the narrator opened the box, revealing the minuscule locket and the two fragile pieces of vellum within. "This is Althea's first marriage certificate. And this," the narrator continued, holding up the second fragment, "is the birth record of her first legitimate son, Arthur Thorne, born before her marriage to Lord Ashworth. The true heir. The lineage you have upheld for centuries is a deception. Althea's defiance, hidden for so long, is finally revealed. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of centuries of suppressed truth. Eleanor's face, contorted with fury and disbelief, slowly drained of color. The palette knife clattered to the floor, forgotten. Her eyes, once burning with righteous anger, now held a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The turning point was not merely a discovery. It was a public execution of a lie, a dramatic and irrefutable unveiling that left no room for denial, no corner for retreat. The carefully constructed edifice of the family's glory, meticulously maintained for generations, had not simply cracked. It had imploded, scattering fragments of deceit across the stunned onlookers. This moment, witnessed by multiple, credible parties, ensured that the truth, once so fragile and hidden, was now irrevocably unleashed upon the world, changing the course of history and the future of the family forever. The silence that followed was deafening, a testament to the sheer magnitude of the revelation, a silence that spoke volumes of a legacy shattered and a new, unsettling truth finally brought to light. The definitive revelation, delivered not in a hushed private meeting, but through the stark, undeniable evidence presented at the annual historical symposium, struck like a seismic event. The quiet academic hall, usually a bastion of measured discourse, erupted into a cacophony of gasps, murmurs, and frantic whispers as the projector screen displayed the incontrovertible proof. The object in Althea's hand was not a locket, but a miniature, intricately crafted signet ring, mirroring one found in a newly unearthed trove of documents belonging to a distant, forgotten branch of the family. This ring, coupled with a series of coded letters and a previously dismissed will, unequivocally proved Althea's secret marriage to a man deemed unsuitable by her family. A man whose lineage, it turned out, held a greater claim to a significant portion of the family's ancestral lands and wealth than the direct line that had prospered for centuries. The shockwaves were immediate, brutal, and far-reaching, ripping through the carefully constructed facade of the family's history. The fallout within the family itself was nothing short of devastating. Lady Eleanor, who had received a preemptive, albeit terse, notification of my findings, was visibly absent from the symposium, a glaring omission that spoke volumes. Her immediate family, however, was present, their faces a canvas of raw, unfiltered emotion. Cousin Thomas, usually so composed, sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Others openly wept, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of betrayal and the sudden terrifying realization that their entire understanding of their heritage had been built on a lie. Some reacted with visceral anger, their gazes darting towards me not with understanding, but with a furious resentment for having shattered their comfortable illusions. The emotional landscape was a minefield, every interaction fraught with unspoken accusations and the bitter taste of truth. Yet amidst the storm, there were unexpected pockets of support. A few distant cousins, previously marginalized for their own quiet skepticism of the family narrative, approached me with cautious nods of solidarity, their eyes reflecting a shared sense of vindication. An elderly aunt, who had always seemed to possess an unspoken understanding of the family's hidden currents, squeezed my hand tightly, a silent acknowledgment of the courage it had taken to unearth such a painful truth. These small gestures, though few, were a lifeline, anchoring me in the turbulent waters. Outside the immediate family, the wider community reacted with a mixture of salacious gossip, profound judgment, and a newfound, almost morbid respect for the power of historical inquiry. The story spread like wildfire, fueled by the sheer audacity of the deception and the dramatic nature of its unraveling. For me, the narrator, the emotional toll was immense, a complex tapestry of conflicting sensations. There was the profound pain of fracturing family bonds, knowing that some relationships once strained were now irrevocably broken. The anger and resentment directed my way, though anticipated, still stung with an unexpected ferocity. Yet interwoven with this pain was an immense, almost intoxicating relief. The truth was finally out. The weight of the deception which I had carried and fought against for so long had been lifted. There was shock, too, at the sheer scale of the past manipulation, at how deeply ingrained the lies had become, twisting generations of lives. But above all, there was a renewed sense of strength and purpose, a quiet satisfaction in having upheld integrity, in giving Althea, and those wronged by the historical erasure, their rightful voice. The immediate aftermath was nothing short of chaotic. News outlets, having caught wind of the symposium's explosive content, descended like vultures. Journalists clamored for interviews, their microphones thrust towards anyone with a connection to the story. Public debates erupted across social media and in local forums, pitting those who defended the family's long-held narrative against those who championed historical accuracy. The art world was abuzz, not only with the historical implications but with the ethical questions surrounding the painting's restoration and the initial attempts to suppress the object's significance. Legal challenges began to unfurl almost immediately. Lawyers, representing the newly recognized lineage, started the complex process of asserting their ancestral claims, while Lady Eleanor, through her formidable legal team, launched a desperate counteroffensive, attempting to discredit my research and the restorer's findings. The air crackled with tension, a palpable sense of a world irrevocably altered. The ancestral home, once a symbol of unshakable prestige, now felt like a mausoleum haunted by uncomfortable truths. Every phone call, every unexpected visitor brought a fresh wave of anxiety or revelation. Friends and acquaintances, unsure how to navigate the social minefield, either offered awkward condolences or distanced themselves entirely. The illusion of a perfect, untroubled lineage had shattered, exposing the intricate web of secrets and power plays that lay beneath. Even the painting itself, once merely a beautiful artifact, had transformed. It now hung in the restorer's studio, no longer just a piece of art, but a potent symbol of defiance, a silent testament to a woman who, even from beyond the grave, had found a way to speak her truth through a tiny hidden object. The media frenzy, initially overwhelming, began to settle into a grinding, persistent hum. Television specials were proposed, documentaries commissioned, and countless articles dissected every nuance of the scandal. My name, once known only in niche academic circles, was now emblazoned across headlines, often accompanied by sensationalist tags. This public scrutiny was exhausting, but it also served a purpose. It ensured that the truth, once released, could not be easily reburied. Lady Eleanor, in her initial public statements, maintained a stoic defiance, dismissing the claims as unsubstantiated fabrication and a malicious attempt to tarnish a venerable family name. But her words rang hollow against the mountain of evidence, and the very force of her denial only served to highlight the depth of her desperation. The legal battles promised to be protracted and bitter, a war of attrition fought in courtrooms and through reams of historical documents. The stakes were incredibly high, not just for the vast inheritance in question, but for the very narrative of a prominent family's history. My role shifted from discoverer to defender, tasked with providing expert testimony and safeguarding the integrity of the findings against relentless attack. The restorer, too, was drawn into the fray, their professional reputation scrutinized, but ultimately bolstered by the meticulous ethical standards they had upheld throughout the process. The object, the small signet ring, was now under heavy security, a tiny catalyst that had brought down an empire of lies, its quiet power reverberating through every corner of society. The emotional weight of witnessing the disintegration of a legacy, even one built on deceit, was profound. It was a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined personal identity can become with perceived history, and how terrifying it can be when that history is challenged. I often found myself reflecting on Althea, the sitter, imagining her quiet rebellion, her determination to leave a trace of her true life despite the overwhelming pressures of her time. Her small act centuries ago had finally borne fruit, blossoming into a truth that uprooted the present. The immediate consequences were raw, painful, and deeply unsettling, But they were also a necessary prelude, clearing the ground for what would inevitably be a long, arduous, but ultimately essential process of reconstruction and healing. The world had shifted on its axis, and there was no turning back. The world had indeed shifted, and the ground, though initially unstable from the seismic shock of truth, slowly began to solidify beneath my feet. The immediate, dizzying chaos of public exposure and familial rupture gradually gave way to a more measured, albeit still intense, reality. My first task, a silent and deeply personal one, was to navigate the treacherous currents of my own emotions. The pain of family estrangement, particularly from those I had once respected, was a dull, persistent ache, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of vindication. The truth, once a whispered suspicion, was now an undeniable fact, laid bare for all to see. The arduous process of rebuilding began, not just my professional standing, which had been both challenged and elevated, but also the very fabric of my personal life. The relentless media attention, while draining, had inadvertently forged a new path. Invitations to speak at academic conferences poured in, requests for scholarly articles multiplied, and suddenly I was not just a historian, but a voice for historical integrity, for the quiet power of artifacts to speak across centuries. My reputation, far from being tarnished by the scandal, was being reconstructed on a foundation of unyielding commitment to factual accuracy and ethical research. Small victories, like fragile shoots pushing through scorched earth, began to emerge. The academic community, after initial skepticism and rigorous peer review, largely embraced the revised historical interpretation of Althea's portrait. What had once been a footnote in a grand family narrative was now a central chapter, a testament to a woman's quiet defiance. Institutions that had once deferred to Lady Eleanor's influence now sought my expertise, and the painting itself, once returned from the legal hold, was viewed with entirely new eyes. It was slated for a special exhibition, not merely as a work of art, but as a historical document, a symbol of hidden narratives finally brought to light. The restorer, too, found a quiet vindication. Their meticulous work and unwavering ethical stance, initially questioned by Lady Eleanor's legal team, were now lauded by professional bodies. Their commitment to the integrity of the artwork, and by extension, the truth it contained, became a case study in responsible conservation. Even within the fractured remnants of the extended family, unexpected alliances began to form. Younger cousins, previously distant or intimidated by Lady Eleanor's formidable presence, reached out. They expressed a quiet gratitude, a relief that the suffocating weight of a fabricated past had been lifted, allowing for the possibility of more honest, if complex, relationships. These were not grand reconciliations, but rather tentative steps towards understanding, built on a shared desire for authenticity. Yet, definitive losses were also acknowledged, their shadows long and unyielding. The chasm between myself and Lady Eleanor, and indeed her immediate children, was now an unbridgeable canyon. There would be no mending of those ties, no reconciliation for the deeply entrenched denial and the desperate measures taken to suppress the truth. The idealized version of the family's past, a comforting myth passed down through generations, was gone forever, replaced by a far more intricate, human, and sometimes painful reality. Mourning that loss, that comfortable illusion, was a necessary step, a letting go of what never truly was. Through this crucible of conflict and reconstruction, profound understandings about myself began to crystallize. I discovered a resilience I hadn't known I possessed, a quiet strength that allowed me to weather public scrutiny, legal battles, and personal attacks without wavering from my commitment to the truth. My moral compass, once tested, proved to be unshakable. I also learned about the capacity for moving forward, not necessarily through forgiveness of those who had wronged me, but through an internal release of the burden of carrying their secrets. The pursuit of truth had defined a significant portion of my life, but now, with that truth unveiled, I was free to redefine myself. New paths, previously unimaginable, began to emerge, I found myself increasingly drawn to cases of contested historical narratives, using my experience to advocate for forgotten voices and overlooked evidence. I became a recognized expert, not just in art history, but in the broader field of historical ethics, often consulted on how to navigate the complex interplay between preservation, provenance, and truth. More importantly, I found a profound personal peace. The obsessive pursuit of Althea's story, while consuming, had also been a form of burden. Now, having honored her silent plea, I could live a life less burdened by historical lies, free to explore other mysteries, or simply to appreciate the quiet beauty of an unvarnished present. The story was visibly progressing, not towards an end, but towards a new beginning, marked by growth, healing, and the quiet triumph of integrity. The legal battles, as predicted, became a protracted and draining affair, a final, desperate gasp from a dying legacy. Lady Eleanor, once so unassailable in her conviction, found her carefully constructed world systematically dismantled by the relentless march of truth. The evidence, meticulously gathered and presented, was overwhelming. The signet ring, once a mere curiosity, became the linchpin, its authenticity and significance validated by independent experts and historical documents unearthed from forgotten archives. Her attempts to discredit the restorer, to paint my findings as malicious fabrication, only served to highlight her own desperation and the lengths she would go to protect a lie. The court ruled decisively, not only validating Althea's secret marriage and the legitimacy of her lineage, but also confirming the true beneficiaries of the vast estate. The ancestral home, the sprawling lands, the very foundations of the family's wealth were now rightfully reallocated, a monumental shift that sent shockwaves through the upper echelons of society. Lady Eleanor's social downfall was swift and brutal. The whispers that had once been confined to drawing rooms now became public pronouncements of scorn and pity. Her once unquestioned position as a matriarch of impeccable standing evaporated, replaced by the ignominy of a woman who had actively suppressed the truth for generations. Invitations to exclusive gatherings ceased. Her charitable patronages were quietly withdrawn, and even her closest allies began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with such a profound and public deception. Her credibility, both personally and professionally, was utterly shattered. The image she had so carefully cultivated, that of an honorable guardian of tradition, crumbled into dust, revealing the manipulation and arrogance beneath. Her attempts to maintain a facade of dignified victimhood were met with a collective, weary sigh from a society that had grown tired of her pretense. She was left isolated, a prisoner in the gilded cage of her own making, stripped not just of wealth but of the very respect she had so fiercely demanded. The silence that now surrounded her was perhaps the most potent consequence of all, a stark contrast to the clamor of her former life, a poignant testament to the ultimate futility of denying an undeniable truth. For me, the resolution was not a moment of triumphant glee, but a profound and quiet sense of emotional justice. There was no joy in seeing Lady Eleanor's world collapse, only the deep satisfaction that the truth, after centuries of suppression, had finally been honored. It was a vindication not just for me, but for Althea, whose silent rebellion had finally found its voice. The weight I had carried, the burden of uncovering such a monumental secret and fighting for its recognition, began to lift. The integrity I had strived to uphold, often against immense pressure and personal cost, had prevailed. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about balance, about setting right a historical wrong and ensuring that future generations would know the true, unvarnished story of a family and its complex past. The relief was palpable, a deep breath exhaled after a long, arduous journey. I found myself looking at the world with a renewed clarity, understanding more deeply the intricate dance between history and identity and the quiet courage it takes to challenge established narratives. The fight had been exhausting, but the outcome, a restoration of historical honesty, felt entirely worth the sacrifice. It was a testament to the enduring power of truth, a force that, however long it may lie dormant, eventually finds a way to surface and reshape the landscape. The portrait of Althea, once a mere family heirloom, then a focal point of scandal, now stood transformed into a powerful symbol. It was acquired by a national gallery, not just for its artistic merit, but for the extraordinary story it told. Re-exhibited with its new comprehensive narrative, detailing Althea's hidden life, her quiet defiance, and the object that brought it all to light, it became a pilgrimage site for those seeking stories of resilience and truth. Visitors would stand before it, not merely admiring the brushstrokes, but contemplating the deeper layers of history, the courage of a woman who dared to leave a secret message for the future. The painting, once an instrument of deception, was now a beacon of honesty, a tangible representation of how even the smallest, most overlooked detail can unravel an entire tapestry of lies. It served as a constant reminder that history is not a static record, but a living, breathing entity, constantly open to reinterpretation and revelation. Its new context made it infinitely more profound, a silent witness to the enduring human struggle for authenticity against the pressures of societal expectation and familial obligation. As I stood before Althea's portrait one final time, before its permanent installation in the gallery, a profound reflection settled over me. The journey had begun with a faint outline in a painted hand, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail obscured by centuries of varnish and deliberate historical revision. That small signet ring, a mere whisper from the past, had roared into the present, tearing down walls of deceit and reshaping the lives of everyone it touched. It spoke volumes about the nature of truth itself, resilient, patient, and ultimately undeniable. It reminded me that history is rarely as straightforward as we are taught. It is a complex tapestry woven with threads of public image and private reality, ambition and quiet rebellion. Family, too, I realized, is a landscape of both fierce loyalty and profound betrayal, a place where love and resentment can coexist, and where the past casts long, often uncomfortable, shadows over the present. The weight of history, I learned, is not just in the grand narratives of kings and wars, but in the intimate, unrecorded moments of individual lives, in the choices made in quiet defiance. Althea, through her small, courageous act, had taught me that even when faced with overwhelming power and societal constraints, a single person can leave an indelible mark, a message destined to be found. Her story, now fully revealed, was a testament to the quiet power of small objects, of symbols imbued with meaning that transcend time and can, against all odds, change the course of lives. The restoration of her portrait had not merely cleaned a canvas, it had cleaned a lineage, purifying a tainted narrative and giving voice to the voiceless. The silence that now descended upon me was not empty, but rich with the echoes of centuries, a quiet contemplation of how deeply interconnected we are to those who came before us, and how vital it is to honor their authentic stories. The journey had ended, but its lessons about integrity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of truth would resonate within me forever. The world, forever altered by a tiny object in a painted hand, was a little more honest, a little more just, and infinitely more profound.